It is the third episode of the Dirty Laundry Game Worn podcast, and it's going to be what I consider a barn burner, a very interesting discussion. I have a wonderful panel this time. First time I've had multiple people on from I would say across the globe, but at least across the northern hemisphere. We got Paul Rank. We have out in San Jose, we have Chris Grissom by audio only down in Texas because he only has a cup and a string down here, and then Tim Watcher in Vancouver. How we doing, gentlemen?
Doing great.
Yeah, doing well. Thank you for having us.
So this one, I wanted to try and bring collectors from different teams, different areas of the country, and discuss. This has hit all the different collectors' pages. A lawsuit against the St. Louis Blues for misrepresenting and selling gear wrong. We'll get into some of the actual case petition and stuff here. I'll even share on the screen some of the auctions that this gentleman, and I will say I have not talked to this gentleman yet. I may reach out at some point, see if he'll want to come on and kind of discuss, if he's allowed to, per his lawyer, his side of things and some of that. And I think it's interesting to get into because it raised a lot of questions. We hear of teams just pumping out jerseys of popular players across not just the NHL, all leagues. So I want to get into if we've seen that, if we're seeing it now, what teams we've heard of or teams that have been busted for. Even one of the ones out of I can't name one of the Canadian league teams that in the last, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, would just pump out just massive amounts of jerseys. And I should have had this pulled up. What's that?
Hey, Jason, I think that might have been the London Knights in the OHL.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
I could not pull the team or the league out of my head because I've worked today and my brain shot. But I think they even got sued up in Canada over that, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So kind of the timeline of this was actually originally filed last year in Kansas City, and then they had to do it just hit July the 8th. They had to do a change of venue to the city of St. Louis. They the petition here, the gentleman who's suing the St. Louis Blues and also SLB Acquisition, which is the ownership group for the Blues, a gentleman named of Aaron Stock. Some of the things he gets into on this piece is he talks about the auction. What the Blues do is they auction on behalf of Blues for Kids. That is their charity arm for the St. Louis Blues. So as any of that stuff is sold, if I buy a lot of stuff from them, I get a receipt that says, okay, you paid this much, the value is X. So like if let's say the jersey costs $150 and I paid $300, the technical write-off I would get would be $150. So they send, it's all the official 501(c), all those kind of things. So they raise, by all intents and purposes, a lot of money. The gentleman has said he has spent $30-some thousand in buying gear, collectibles from the Blues, $30,627 to be exact. And I thought this was an interesting piece of this too, is he said he purchased this much total from defendants, being the Blues, and from the secondary market. And again, I am no lawyer. I do not pretend to be one. I've done a law radio show and no lawyers, and I've talked to some even on this. That piece seems a little bit interesting because secondary market shouldn't count here and doesn't count here. And maybe it's just for reference, but if he tries doing anything with that really in the case, that shouldn't count. He talks about after the Blues won the Cup in 2019, Blues memorabilia skyrocketed and the values dramatically increased, especially the 2019 championship winning season. Playoff stuff and cup stuff became valuable collectors. It says a substantial part of the value of an article of memorabilia is affected by whether the article is game worn or game used piece of equipment, which we all agree with. If it's issued, never touched the ice, of course it's going to be less because maybe the player may have looked at it from across the room. Let's see. And they get into defining what that piece of equipment is, that it was worn competitively, be it regular season or a playoff game by a certain player. This is he gets into articles worn are more valuable than issued. Again, something we agreed to. This is one of the pieces that I threw out in a lot of the game worn groups, and I think one of the pieces we can touch on here to start and then get into some of the big details. He says articles which are signed by players are inherently more valuable than articles not signed by players. And like I said, I put this out in multiple collecting groups, and I was surprised at the responses. It was very all over the place. What are your thoughts on getting jerseys, sticks, gloves, helmets, whatever signed? Does it change the value? Is it per collector, you do what you want, or does it affect, I guess, even if you're to purchase something, does that affect you?
I'll answer that, or at least my opinion. To me, it's more about marketability than increasing or decreasing value. Because if you get an item signed, there's a certain number of collectors out there who might value it more because they want their item signed. But there's also a large community of collectors who want their game worn items exactly as they were worn on the ice, and that would be unsigned. And so there's some hardcore collectors who feel like, hey, I want this jersey, but the autograph's on it, so I'm going to pass. So to me, it's more about marketability, who you're able to sell that jersey to, because you're going to lose some of your market if you're trying to sell that jersey at some point down the line. And obviously, in our hobby, there's a number of collectors that kind of run a side gig as removing autographs. And I mean, I've had autographs removed. Paul, I'm sure you've had autographs removed. It's pretty common. And again, to me, it's there are those people who do want their stuff autographed, but I always recommend, when I talk with collectors about on this topic, to me, it's you will lose part of your market if you go down that road. So to me, it's more about marketability than value, so to speak.
Chris or Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree with everything Tim just said there. To me, it's not really the value. It's, can you resell it? A lot of people do not want jerseys, or, well, I'm going to stick with jerseys which are signed, especially personalized. One interesting tidbit I can throw in one of the Facebook groups I run, one of our questions to get into the group is, do you want your game worn jersey signed, and why? And it's amazing some of the responses we get. A lot of them are like, why wouldn't I? It's that there's a certain group of people who want them signed always, and a lot of them want them signed, because they like wearing them and prefer to have it signed. Then, I'm in the camp. When I pick up a jersey, if I see the player or whatever and have it signed, we have them sign it on the fight strap, and they're always will. I've not met one player who's not willing to do that. But as for value, I think it decreases your market if you want to resell it. But there's lots of good people out there who remove the signatures, and you can't even tell in most of those cases.
Chris,
yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've noticed happening a lot more lately is you'll start seeing people inscribe game used. They'll have the player go and inscribe game used on it. And I've seen that happen on stuff that was not game used. So they're trying to use the player's reputation, having potentially worn it, as making something more authentic or real than it really is. And that drives me nuts when I see game used inscribed on underneath it. So for me, though, in terms of value as a collector, you guys know my number one collector focus is Curtis Joseph. So with him, if there's particular items I want, I'm very willing to overlook if it's signed or not. It's not going to deter me, just because, kind of super fan status. If it's the piece of memorabilia you want, you're not necessarily going to be picky. But I completely agree that if you're looking at just your standard jerseys or autographed game worn jerseys, you are going to lose some potential buyers because a lot of people just, I want to see it exactly as it was on the ice. and they don't want to get that messed up with some autograph that you would have never seen out there. So, but yeah, I don't think that that's a fair statement to say it absolutely increases the value. I think some people may pay a little more, but I think most people won't pay any different, or just avoid it completely.
And I will say, I think it was early on when the Blues launched their online auction stuff that we'll get on the website here in a little bit and show some of the stuff he's complaining about. Is early on with the jerseys, they actually put that they would get them signed, and there was a big uproar. A lot of us collectors said, "Don't let us try and get to the player later and get it signed. Don't start with that." And they actually switched back to going, "These will not be signed." In a few cases, like the special warm-ups, if they wear them for something, those are signed, which is fine. But the actual game jerseys, a bunch of us went to them and said, "This is a bad idea, don't do it this way," and they listened. I will say, and we'll get into some of this, is touch on things, is they are very receptive, and we'll even talk about, I think, one of the pieces a bunch of us reached out on. But yeah, to put that in the legal brief saying that these items are inherently more valuable, is the Blues ought to go, no, that's opinion. That definitely isn't any fact. I mean, heck, I'll send them just the groups that we're in when I asked that question and all the answers we got. So getting into to some more of this is it talks about how the Blues auction price works. It's the e-gesture. A lot of teams use that, or variances of that type of thing. So you can bid on your phone, on your computer, whatever, as we all know. It talks about how the public is not allowed to inspect the item before purchase and simply views a photograph of the item and detailed descriptions on the website, which is absolutely correct. Sometimes it's just the jerseys are usually a front and back picture. The stick is usually either the full length of the stick or sometimes the blade, depending. Gloves are just kind of an overhead shot. And if you go to the game, sometimes they'll have some of the bigger items in their area where they show off their auctions, but it's not they're right. You can't go see these in person anywhere. And it says, because of this, plaintiff and the public are forced to rely on the article's description from the defendants. It says, through research and sometimes through patent deficiencies or glaring mislabeling of items, plaintiff discovered that a huge portion of his collection purchased from defendants did not match the description provided by them. I have not seen, other than the picture in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch online, I haven't seen like a detailed list, and I don't believe it's, at least in what's been filed with the courts, of every single thing he has and what he disputes is, call it legit, quote unquote legit, or not, or misrepresented. So one of the first items he goes into here is, this is on October 24, 2019, plaintiff participated in an auction for Jordan Binnington 2018-19 regular season game used leg pads. At auction, plaintiff paid $1,695 for what he believed were Binnington's pads from 18-19 season. After his purchase, the plaintiff determined through photo matching the pads were not used in 18-19, but rather from 19-20. And let me go in and share the screen here. I actually have, I'll have to get to the right piece here. I have the auction for one of those up here. That's their description. We'll get into in a minute because Paul, I believe you're the one that found that. Let's see here. These are the ones I think he paid $1,695 for.
Correct.
So if I go in here, and sorry for the view, it's doing mobile for some reason. So yeah, it says bid on a pair of number 50 Jordan Binnington's game-worn leg pads from the 18-19 regular season. All the pictures it gives is this front picture here, which you can zoom in nice and see very light wear. And then the only other picture they show is his name stitched on the bottom of the boot. Nothing from the back, nothing from other sides. I will say, and in at least me reading the brief multiple times, nowhere does it say in there where this photo match he found came from. I stuck pretty much all dates because especially you said 1920 and stuck older dates in there as well. I went looking for a match, maybe I missed it, but I had almost 90 pages to look through for, I just did search for Jordan Bennington in those time frames. I never found one at all. But I'm not saying I didn't miss it, but for that being light wear and there was some particular marks, I couldn't find a match for that. So that one I thought was kind of interesting. So that at least doing the research I have seems to kind of line up with that. So then that's the first auction. He says it was from 1920 instead of 2018, 2019. And he did wear that same pattern pad design over a couple years. So going on to the next one, November 10th, 2019, plaintiff participated in an auction for Bennington 2019-2020 preseason and regular season leg pads. That one, I don't know where he says where he gets that they're preseason, because this is a description for that one from going. And again, with this, for anybody listening at home, you see the GiveSmart link. If you just put that generic link in there and sign in with your login, if you have one, you can search any dates and find these auctions. So that's exactly what I did. Is these aren't screenshots; these are the actual auctions up there. But all this says is it was worn in the 1920 regular season. So again, same thing. Two pictures, the boot and the front. I, again, from the things I looked through and going off what he suggested in the legal brief, could not find any matches either way, which to me gets a little questionable. He says that he paid $1,800 for those, as you can see from the price there, 8 bids. Plaintiff determined photo matching that was used in the 18-19 season, but rather the 1920 season. But this was done. Some of the dates, his auction dates are a little bit off, and some other stuff doesn't quite line up correctly, which also raises some questions. So he goes on with this brief, says defendant's mislabeling affects the value of the pads that plaintiff purchased and also undermines the authenticity of the products purchased by plaintiff and others because items were materially different than what they were auctioned as. Have you guys seen, and I don't know if you buy the equipment side much, any of the three of you, have you seen some of the issues like this where goalie pads get chucked out there for an auction? Oh yeah, they were worn in that time frame, and nobody can really lock it in.
Hey, I know I didn't get to take a crack at investigating these specific pads yet, but with Benner, we've seen where he'd use a pair of pads once, right? And for whatever reason, whether it was how they were made or I think he's a little superstitious too. If something happened, he may not wear them again. They may get relegated to practice. So it's one of those things. If these were used one game, during the regular season, and for some reason he wasn't happy with them or felt superstitious about them, they might have just became warm up only after that. But if it was the single game, that's going to be really hard to match marks on. And I know some goalies, I'm not sure if Benner does this or not, or if the equipment manager does for him. Sometimes you'll see they'll actually go and they'll clean the marks off the pads, especially if there's a lot of white. So those are all potential variables you have to kind of understand. Did those come into play or not when you're trying to match these things? But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if something like this was used a single game, or potentially not at all, but a lot of the practice only stuff, if it's made for practice only, it's usually marked or embroidered way.
And we'll get into that momentarily.
Yeah.
And I will say, and Paul, I know you've helped with some of the shark sales and stuff, and I don't know if you've looked at it much, or Tim, when you handle the goalie gear, they're all signed somewhere on the gear by K. Whitmore. And then you see the little KW for any of the collectors out there that don't know or don't know what that means. And as you guys probably all know, as I collect a lot of Mike McKenna's jerseys and have a bunch of his gear. All the K. Whitmore signatures I have also have a date next to them. The pads do, at least. The gloves just have the KW. So I'll be curious on if either set of these pads, because it's not clear in the brief, nor is it in the pictures, if wherever Kay Whitmore's signature is on these, if there's a date with them. Usually it's when he's inspected them, from my research and my understanding.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Some more photos would definitely help with just us doing our own investigation on it.
So getting into the brief, and feel free to jump at any point. I know some of this is a little say monotonous, but want to break down all the facts that's been filed here.
Before you go on with additional stuff in the briefs, the one thing that's confusing about the one you have up on the screen, it's advertised as 1920 game worn, and his complaint is that they're not from 1819.
Correct.
I totally, and that's in the amended brief and the original brief. I know I'm assuming that's just a typo in his stuff, but so I don't know if he thinks these were worn in 1819, or if he thinks they were worn in 1920, 2019/20, there's no problem.
Right. And you're right, especially because the original brief had this, and then it's carried over the amended, and they've corrected other issues that were in the original with some dates and stuff. So maybe this is a screw up, but if this gets carried into the case like this, everybody's gonna go, well, what's the problem? It doesn't even line up with what you asked. He also
reading it, I couldn't find a problem with what.
No, in this case, definitely not. So a few days after these were purchased, he reached out to Nick Gay, who runs the Authentic Game Use program. He's the assistant for that. I've worked with Nick on a lot of purchases. I have talked about how the goalie pads weren't labeled properly. Said he also bought a Jake Allen goalie glove, was missing a certificate of authenticity, was also photo matched to not be from the proper season, but in his filing doesn't clarify that one. This one, continuing with purchases, and you'd think you would stop, and we'll get into that a little bit farther down through this thing, but it says December 29th, 2020, plaintiff participated in an auction for Jordan Binnington 1920 regular season game used goalie stick. At auction, he paid $1,575 for what he believed was a 1920 stick. Plaintiff determined through photo matching the stick was not used in any regular season games in 1819 or 1920. The wear and tear on the stick indicates the stick was used in practice. I will say, when I read those particular lines, I remember, and Chris, you may even remember this, is we as a group had this discussion on that stick on our Blues game worn page, because there was so much wear, and several people were like, this isn't a game stick at all. And we did get pushback from the team on it, saying, oh, this is what we were given. This is what it was told. And it was a little bit of a back and forth on that. And it did sell. So I don't know if you remember that piece or not. The plaintiff, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. And I'll just for the listeners on this one, just because you see a modern goalie stick with insane amounts of puck wear on it, it doesn't mean it wasn't game used. And I'll share specifically, I've got a goalie stick that was clearly used in practice. However, there were some very key marks on it that I did photo match to a game. So you'll have some players use a stick during a game, and then they may go ahead and continue using it, and it'll just become a practice stick. So you have to look at all the pieces, and sometimes you have to ignore what's happened to it, because it was it could be game used and then used in practice later and then beat the heck, right? So that's one thing. But if I remember correctly, I don't think we could find anything that matched specifically on that one. In that case.
And because of what the time frame, the descriptions, and I guess going on in general on, and I've looked at a lot of the other auction descriptions, especially for equipment, it is vague. It was game worn in this time frame is all it says. Jerseys are a little bit more specific in a lot of cases, where it said it was worn from this date to this date. So those are a little stamped better, but with sticks and gloves and helmets and goalie pads, And I'm assuming the other your guys' teams, Tim and Paul, are the same way. Is it's a very broad description. It's not, unless it's something that he used this stick or this thing on this night for some special thing. It's probably very similar to this, where it's just the buyer assumes, okay, it was used in a game sometime this year or this whatever season. So getting a little farther into the year, after he talked to Nick, he actually met with the general counsel or sent a letter to the general counsel of the St. Louis Blues, talking about all the inconsistencies. Made some other aware of other auction items that did not match descriptions, even though he didn't purchase them. He said the items were not purchased by himself, but were purchased by other unwitting members of the public. Plaintiff detailed upon an investigation research how authentication process was faulty and subject to errors in item labeling, even gave them suggestions on how to improve it. I don't see anything wrong with that. June 16th, the lawyer wrote back saying that they'd received a letter, would investigate. June 26th of that year, said he would, the lawyer from the Blues would actually meet with the plaintiff. July 8th, they had a sit down, talked about some of the different issues. At that time, the Blues said they were using interns to authenticate their game used equipment and admitted they had made mistakes in the authentication process. That's an interesting piece of this filing for sure. If this hits court, actually goes to trial, will this attorney or others say, well, it's not how it was really said? But, and I don't know, I don't know the interns that work for the Blues. I'm assuming they're getting the sports management or whatever they are to learn this. They may not know hockey at all. And we don't know what tools they're given to look at this stuff. Part of it, and you guys are probably familiar with it as well, is these trainers or the equipment guys give this equipment to whoever handles their game use stuff. It says, oh yeah, this was worn here or this was done here. I don't know that they truly know all the time because of the pile of gear they've got. It's every team in this is a drop in the bucket, I think, to most teams. This kind of stuff is small potatoes to them. Yeah, they make some money, or in this case, it goes to charity. But this isn't a huge thing on their radar in general.
It is not their priority to make sure they have the right dates on a set of gear. When the Sharks sell gear at the equipment sale, it's just in a big pile, and there's no dates on anything. And you don't even know what season it's from half the time. There was a pair of Pavelski gloves at the last sales. I mean, I think they were game issued, but clearly they weren't used the past 2 years. So, I mean, the teams I am closest to, they don't worry about the dates at all on the gear. On jerseys, that's considerably different. But.
Sure, and most teams are pretty solid on that. And Tim, I'm assuming that the Avalanche are pretty good with most of the time with their tracking of at least the jersey part.
Let me talk about the Canucks first.
Okay.
The Canucks have a year-end equipment sale, so I've been to that a few times, not every year, but they do have, like Paul mentioned, huge piles of gloves and skates, and like with no tagging whatsoever. It's you just have to figure it out on your own. They typically do have goalie pads, sometimes multiple pads from the same goalie, and again, it's typically it's goalies who are on the roster, but occasionally there's a set of pads from a goalie who had played there 2 or 3 years ago. Just depends what they find. The Canucks also have kind of they've moved to an auction format, much like a lot of teams on Van Base over the past couple seasons. But prior to that, they had a full-time employee who kind of handled all their game worn stuff, and his name was Stu, and he was a great resource. He worked with collectors who had questions on items and was able to research it. But now, since it's all through Van Base, it's kind of like Paul said, it's not really a focus of the team, and there's no real source for information on it. There's sometimes stock pictures go up, sometimes actual pictures go up on things that get auctioned off, but there's not a whole lot of information there. And at the equipment sales, it's the same thing. It's just cashiers working. Occasionally there's, an equipment person in there, but very little that's labeled. It's labeled as gloves or skates or breezers or socks. It's just there available for sale. And if you want it, you take it, sticks. But yeah, there's not a lot of information. Now, as far as the Avs go, the Avs also, they currently use an auction system. Stuff goes from the equipment guys to part of the marketing department, I believe, and they handle these charity auctions. And there have been multiple instances of jerseys and equipment that is auctioned off and represented as from a given set from a given season. And when the auction's over and people receive their jerseys, certain collectors, members who are in the Facebook groups and whatnot have reported. I haven't had any issues because I haven't bought anything from the Avs Direct in at least 5 years. But some of the collectors who have, they've received jerseys with absolutely no wear. They've gotten jerseys they've been able to photo match for different seasons, different time periods, things like that. And there's been discussions about returning items. And like, for example, at one point, I think the Avs sold a lot of 5 Nathan MacKinnon jerseys, if you can imagine that. And so
Wow.
that lot went for big bucks, but turned out that lot had 3 gamers and 2 game issued. So the person who won that asked to return the 2 game issued, and the Avs said, no, if you do a return, you return them all 5. So that person then went and sold the 2 game issued and whatnot. But again, that information wasn't available on the front side during the auction that, hey, there's 3 gamers and 2 issued in this set. It's just, hey, there's 5 game worn MacKinnon jerseys, and bid accordingly. So so the Avs have a lot of challenges in the current rendition of their game worn program. And honestly, with the Avalanche, it's kind of been that way for a long time. They through the years, they've had issues dating back all the way to the first season with some jerseys that came out in 95-96, the first year that they won the Stanley Cup Finals. There's a lot of Avs jerseys with final patches from that season that were never worn in the finals. And in my opinion, there's only 2 jerseys in the hobby that are actually photo match game worn jerseys from that 95-96 season. And everything else out there there's a lot of game worn jerseys, but at the end of the season, the Avs basically put a patch on every jersey they had at McNichols and then sold them all. And it was kind of, let the buyer beware. I ended up with an Ozolinch with a cup final patch. I bought it from a very reputable dealer and couldn't video match it, couldn't photo match it. And I ended up returning it because the premium I paid for that jersey being an Avalanche Finals jersey when I found out it wasn't, I couldn't justify that premium back then. That was in 2001. So I returned the jersey and got my money back. There was no issue with the dealer. He was fine with it. And again, that jersey's in the hobby today. But I think the person who owns it now knows that it's a first year Avs jersey, but just not a finals worn. And there's a lot of those out there.
And so many teams seem to do that because they know, and maybe it's they don't think people will immediately go to Getty or wherever to try and photo match these things. And it's so easy now with the amount of photos taken. I helped somebody not long ago to photo match a pair of Blues gloves, and there's a nice mark on the thumb. I mean, it was worn from like 3 or 4 months, and we matched it from December to almost February. And because you could see this one particular big stick mark or something on the thumb, and it lined up through the whole time. And I told him, like, some players wear gear until they fall apart, and you're gonna get lucky. But a lot of other times with gear, especially, you don't know if they're using it in practice and whatnot. You may get lucky, but I guess as we get into these, and I don't want to dwell too much more on the complaint itself, because there's a lot of other details. A lot of the talk about the meeting with the Blues, how they're going to resolve it. They said that we're not giving you any money back for the old stuff. At one point told them basically quit buying from us. We'll try and correct things. He emailed this gentleman even emailed the Blues owner, sent a letter to Senator Danforth senator from Missouri, which that upset the Blues. So it's one of the letters that the Blues sent back was basically at one point told the plaintiff to keep buying game worn items from them. We'll fix the issue. And then somewhere also in there said, no, please stop. He does also reference some gloves that he bought that when he got them, right on the inside of the tagging said practice on them. That is I've seen a ton of gloves that way. That's a true way to do it. I'll do one more quick screen share here in I actually found the auction he bought them from. See if I can zoom in on this well enough to show in the video. But if you look right here, you can see the practice label plain as day, but the description says game used glove and blocker. No, it wasn't, because I guarantee he wasn't using that in a game. So some of it comes down to, I think, how the Blues describe things is player used. If they'd have just said player used for this equipment, would that have gotten them off the hook? Or something else. And I had a good friend of mine from St. Louis, and then I have you guys going to jump in here again, who is a collector, is also a lawyer, really went in and broke this down for me. She said there's some issues with credibility, some of the timing, the continuing to buy after you've already had a bunch of equipment show that it doesn't line up to what it's supposed to be. The sloppy first petition, even the sloppy second petition, where they filed this case, is the $22,000. Does he just want it back? I guess there's with this being auction, is the value of it truly the value you could get today? Because again, as players go up and down in popularity, the value of their stuff goes up and down too. It's like the stock for the NHL. When things are popular, they're up, and then if the player does something stupid or they're not playing well, then that stuff's not desired as much. What are some of your thoughts on this? Try not to ramble too much on it, but there's just so much interesting information with it.
Jason, one question I had on it is, he was obviously told at some point not to participate in the Blues auctions, and he continued to do so. And I believe in part of the petition near the end, he actually admitted that he bought some of the items. Like, I don't know if he bought it through a second person but he was continuing to buy items from the auctions, even though he was asked not to. And I thought that was pretty interesting, if nothing else. That at least that's how I interpreted the draft, that he was buying things after he wasn't supposed to be buying things.
Yeah, and that, you're right. I saw that as well, and that does raise some questions. And it's I mean, they're saying this is fraud, deceit. They're accusing the Blues of doing this, really doing this maliciously. And he says too that the new certificate should say what games this stuff was worn in, not just game used. Good luck tracking that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's that's a decision for the Blues to, do they want to put that much labor and that much, structure into their game worn program, and no collector is going to be able to dictate that. That's a business decision that only the Blues or any other NHL team is going to make. And obviously we know there are some teams out there like Pittsburgh who, have a very complete, and as far as I'm aware, I'm not a Pittsburgh collector, but I think a pretty accurate system of recording devices and things that tell you exactly what games your equipment and jerseys are worn in. But again, just looking back at the history of the hobby, we've had other systems like that, like Sports Registry in Chicago, that have gone belly up, and that data and information is gone. And you've got like the Red Wings with Hockeytown Authentics, that used to do serial numbers of jerseys and equipment for years. And as far as I'm aware, there's no there's no way, if you have a Hockey Town Authentic letter or a tag, there's no way to reference it back at this point, because that information, maybe the Wings still have it, I don't know, but it's not available to the general collecting community. So again, like, what works today or doesn't work today is great, but 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road, who knows if these systems are going to still be in play or not, because as any regime changes within the front office of a team, the program can change quite a bit, and obviously that can have long lasting impacts to collectors and people who bought this stuff through the years.
And you're right. And even the Blues in the last, call it 4 seasons, they started affixing a serial numbered sticker that you can go on their site and put in, and it's basically the same thing as the paper certificate is telling you, yeah, it was game used this season, or if it's a jersey, there's the more detail of when exactly or roughly it was worn. But with equipment, again, between going to practices and doing all these things, you just don't know. And when the equipment or the equipment guys hand them over to the people to selling it, they're just relying on what they're being told. And in most cases, people are probably just excited to have this stick or these gloves from their favorite player. I mean, yes, there are the diehards like us that I try to, when I get whatever jersey I get shipped to me, immediately go, or during auctions, I've been able to look at them just from the pictures posted, the jerseys, or sometimes the gear, and be able to photo match it before I've ever placed a bid on it. And that's in some of the cases of what this guy should have done. Is this wasn't a buy it now situation. It's an auction. Research it first.
That did surprise me that he did not try to photo match the pads to the cup season. There were only a few photos, but I thought it was good enough to try to match it to something.
Especially when you could blow up the front of those pads and really pick out some of the wear.
Exactly. So that was a little bit surprising, that because I know on a lot of the auctions we're watching, like the Avs playoff auctions, we've matched jerseys that were supposed to be worn during the playoffs to the regular season, and also to the playoffs too. But the dates are all over the place on the Avs recent non-cup finals jerseys.
And it's so go ahead, Chris.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. One thing I will add. So we're kind of looking at this as veterans, right? We've been collecting and doing a lot of this stuff for a long time. I know with the Blues, particularly with that cup run, they had a lot of new folks come in, and when you're seeing auctions from the Blues and it says game worn, game used, sometimes the collectors or these folks that are just coming in, they don't know to ask the questions yet. They don't know that there's actually very good reason to research and inform yourself if you're brand new to it. So I don't know if this guy falls in that group of folks, if he was pretty new to it and just went in, kind of trusting everybody, what they say is what it is, and found out along the way. I would be curious to better understand the sequence of things of when he was buying, when he started to understand there was issues, and when did he stop? Because if you keep buying and there's problems, that it's almost like you're okay, I want to be a victim, right? If I know there's problems and I keep going, that's a little strange. So I would like to know better with that. But I will say with the Blues in particular, there's a couple of times we've seen stuff that was clearly not labeled correctly, and it was specific, not very general. Like one of the games where Jordan Binnington was using the retro pads and used a special stick for it. They said it was from that specific night. We all searched for that and we could never find it. We could never find the match for it. It had to be practice, had to be. And we raised that to him, but it still sold in that one case. However, back when they had some of those big closet finds where they started putting up some of the 90s jerseys, we all know there's an era of Blues jerseys that has a lot of rough story behind it, right? And some of those were put up at auction, and there was at least one in particular that was starting to get pretty high bids. and myself and a few others had absolutely no confidence in that jersey. So I actually emailed, and I won't name the name, but it was someone pretty high up in the Blues organization, and they took it down. They didn't let it ride. So I've noticed that if it gets elevated to the right place and they see that it's going to be a pretty big impact, like a pretty high priced jersey, I've seen them do the right things. And kind of like you said with your experience with Nick, they tend to try and fix things if there's issues. So I
Sure.
am very curious to understand, with these, how did it come about where there's kind of a stop on that stuff, right? And how much was legit and how much wasn't with the complaints.
Right. And there's been issues where people would misbid, and it's not hard to do, especially if you're on your phone where you punch in too big of numbers, and they made how you could cancel your bid with so many up until it closed or something like that. But as I found, at least Chris, your experience and mine with the Blues with reaching out, if you have solid documentation behind your reaching out to them saying, hey, this is bad because, and if you can either give dates or pictures or whatever, they're willing to listen. If you just think, well, I can't find pictures of that, they don't seem to take that as a solid response. But again, I've some of the comments that I've seen since the article hit last week were people are like, well, I bought a stick at the thing and they said it was game worn and it didn't have any tape on it. Well, then you shouldn't have bought it because you touched it and looked at it and there's no tape on the stick. It wasn't used. The players, I mean, we all know players get piles of sticks, especially. Some players go through multiple pairs of gloves in a game and cycle them around, whatever. Unless it is being sold for a particular game, be it the Winter Classic, outdoor game, something where it's a one-time event, and you can go in that window of pictures and say, look, I matched these gloves or this helmet, and we were talking before we came on live here. I bought a pair of Buchnevich Winter Classic pants and looked while the auction's up the way it was sitting in the picture. Big line down the front of the pants. Immediately go through and find a great picture. I think in the second period it happened. Bingo. Matched them perfect. No, it was worn the day before for warm-ups, and then they sold them. So you can narrow that stuff down, but in a lot of cases with gear and even goalies, as somebody who plays goalie, those guys go through a lot of pads. Like Chris, like you said, is sometimes you get a goalie that they get their set of pads and try it and something doesn't feel right. Okay, that's done. And then they show up at the equipment sale or they auction them off. Because when I was at the Blues one last week, there were 3 or 4 sets of Bennington pads and 2 or 3 of Hussos in there. Well, and they all varying amounts of wear. Some look like they just came out of the box. So it's so hard unless you have somebody tracking that. Good luck truly narrowing it down.
Yeah, for sure. And to the other part of your question, what would what have we seen in terms of other teams or other groups with how they kind of list their items? I know Major League Baseball now they have their program where they have the little serialized numbers and you can go look up was it issued or used for their jerseys, stuff like that. And they're ultra conservative with how they call it if it's game used or issued. Unless they can definitively say yes, we witnessed it, we saw it, and obviously there's overhead with that, right? They unless they can absolutely guarantee, yes, I can absolutely confirm that was used, they'll put it as issued. And I've actually photo matched some baseball jerseys, Cardinals jerseys that were all listed as issued, but I was able to find the marks, the pulls, all that kind of stuff on the jersey and show, hey, it absolutely was used. So if the Blues are looking for suggestions, I'd recommend, come up with a simple process to try and do a quick photo match on Getty for some of it, if they want, maybe for jerseys, maybe not for gear. But past that, maybe it's just a matter of saying, hey, is it worn or not? Does it show wear? And if it is, then just call it player used, maybe from regular season warm-ups or practice.
Yeah.
And leave it up. So that's pretty transparent to say, hey, we don't know. It shows it's worn, but we don't know. So it's up to you all to do your research and see how comfortable you feel, right? I think that's a safe way to do it. And I think that kind of sets expectations low. And for those of us who like to go find these things, I'm sick like that. I love going to photo match stuff anyway. So that's a party for me.
And again, with all the high res pictures now and Getty and other sites like that, and I know the Blues have access to it because in a few cases, in specialty situations, they posted the photo match in the auction. When it was some bigger name stuff, I think it was even back to they had found some Pronger jerseys not long ago, 90s and early 2000 ones, and they put them photo matches from Getty right in the listing. And again, I know that takes a lot of time and manpower, but let's find some terms that one doesn't confuse the end user, and with these the texting auctions and things like that, it has opened up the marketplace to a lot more people. I mean, before we as collectors knew and would find out, okay, here's how the team sells them. Is it in the store? Is it online? Do you have to call? You have to go stand in line, whatever it is. Once all these teams started going to this text-based auction and anybody can sign up anywhere, your market and your audience grew tenfold. So I think that plays into it, but us as collectors, we always know, I mean, the famous line, do your homework. We always do. And again, like Chris said, we don't know. The plaintiff talks a lot about photo matching. So it seems like he has at least enough working knowledge to go in and do those things. So I'm going to guess at least a mid-range collector. It's a name I've never heard before, not in the collecting group that Chris and I manage in that, but not all of them join those things, but it does raise some questions. But you do have to worry about the call it the average consumer. They hear about these auctions. Oh, I can go get my favorite player. They don't know what all goes into this. They trust what the auction's listed at, and that's it. But I think with gear, it's a lot more of a guessing game in most cases, not all, but most. So I guess from here is we'll see what happens with the Blues case. If it's settled, I honestly hope it goes to court because I'd really like to see how it all plays out. Will it? I'm guessing with some of the glaring stuff and even the amended petition, I think it has a good chance if the Blues want to fight it, but I'm thinking more or less they're just going to settle and we'll never hear about it. And you'll see changes come in either in how the listings are done or something, but I think that could end up being what happened. Again, I'll keep track of this case between me and the collector lawyer friend, and as we get more, definitely put it out there. So are there, I mean, we've touched on quite a few different teams that like to play fast and loose, at least with jerseys and that, but are there any other teams that or changes you think we should see in these kind of auctions in the hobby? And I know that's a tough question because each team does it a little bit different.
Yeah, I'd really like to see if the NHL has an opportunity to provide some framework for the teams, to what's a good process for managing this stuff, right? Or what's a good methodology for listing things or standards for listing things. If you want to say it's game used, okay, you can do that, but maybe here's some criteria you have to meet. I think if the NHL did that centrally and provided that as a resource to the teams, that would benefit a lot of folks. But I'm also conscious of different teams that, they are an operation. They have to manage their overhead with, do they have interns doing the work, or do they need to hire someone that's part of the process to work this stuff and has maybe a more critical eye? I feel like a central push of some kind would probably help quite a bit. And that way it's pretty standard for all across the teams, but not in a way that makes it abrasive for the equipment managers, right? It needs to make sense. But I think it's a pretty light touch would make things a lot better, just with rules for how you name things and label it.
Yeah, more of a standard way to do things. And I mean, looking at companies like MyGray who have a lot of teams, and I know they dealt with mostly jerseys. Some teams they did equipment, is they're very good at, hey, if you get this and there's an issue with it, we'll stand behind it. And there's not a lot of questions, but some teams are like, it's in your hands now. We don't care. Good luck. But as if you're a new collector, if you've been in this a long time, if you're a new collector, reach out to us older folks that can help. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with Paul, Tim. This is really the first time outside of messaging you about joining the group tonight I've talked to you, but I've seen you out there. None of us, I think, have an issue if somebody reaches out and said, "Hey, I'm looking at this jersey or I'm looking at this thing. What do you think of the he's like, say the person's offering this much. What do you think? Or I've bought this jersey. I think I have this photo match." I'm one for wanting to grow the hobby and make those connections and friends. I mean, yeah, the jerseys are nice, but it's helping each other out and bringing more people into this because we want to continue to have that hobby grow.
Yeah, I agree with you on completely. Just about a lot of people in this hobby are more than happy to help out and give their best opinion on uh, whether the shirt's legit, matches to it. Pricing's another issue where uh, not always comfortable commenting on some of the pricing we're seeing these days. But
Yeah, it's
uh,
I think it's up across the board.
oh, definitely true. So without a doubt. But yeah, I mean, most of us are, if you have a question on something, on a team that we know anything about, hell, even most of us, if we don't know anything about the team, we're kind of neurotic enough. We start going through photos anyhow and trying to match it because
Sure.
that's just what we enjoy doing.
So is there any other teams that you guys have heard about with weird issues like this or things that have, I guess, blown up or caused problems or caused people to either leave the hobby or like we said, the team from Canada that had a jersey factory, I swear, with some of their stuff. Like I said, the Philadelphia Flyers, their AHL team, the Lehigh Valley Phantoms they've done a lot of the text based auctions as well over the last year and a half or two. There was a lot of questionable jerseys showing up out of those teams. I've seen a few others where some other AHL teams were selling. It helped because they were selling them as issued, but the nameplate on the back, you looked at the player, but you looked at the model of jersey. It wasn't the type worn when that player was there. So seeing some of that stuff, but it's still, if somebody that doesn't look for those kind of red flags buys it, they assume that, oh yeah, he was supposed to wear it and didn't because this. Well, no, he was never on the team when this brand of jersey or whatever was done. So it's I think we're here to educate and again, I've spent a lot of money with the Blues, not near as much as this guy or others, but anytime I see issues, I reach out and I'm respectful. I lay out my findings, and in most of the cases, I've not had an issue with them either giving me an answer back of why I missed something. And in one case, I actually did, but reach if you have a team that's doing this, reach out and especially do it before you buy something. These aren't, in most cases, buy it now situations. The auction's up there for several days. Look for pictures, look for things that line up with this. I mean, some of this stuff costs a lot of money. I mean, Tim, you're seeing it with the Avalanche prices right now with all the Cup stuff. I don't envy anybody trying to buy an Avalanche Cup jersey. The Blues, when they won theirs, were stupid. I don't own one for that reason. I couldn't afford one. Anything else we should touch on before we get out of here this evening, gentlemen?
I don't know, I think Paul put it well that, all of us have our, our teams that we're, quasi experts we know a lot about, but if anyone has questions, reach out. And just because, if I don't know about Chicago Blackhawks jerseys, but I probably know 2 or 3 collectors that do, kind of thing. And it's all a community. And the only other thing I'd say is, if anyone out there is listening, if you ever have a chance to attend a Jersey Expo, wherever that might be, I think it's so well worthwhile. You can go into a room and see jerseys from every NHL team, from every era, from minor leagues, bantam all the way up and international. It's an amazing experience. And again, it's all about the people and meeting these collectors who know so much about our hobby and the history of these teams. And I encourage everyone, if you have a chance to go to an expo, it's a great experience, and you'll learn way more than you can ever imagine.
and see pieces of history.
Yeah,
like you
absolutely.
said, is being I was at a expo, what, 5 or 6 years ago with you, Paul, and some of the stuff that we got to lay our eyes and hands on it's killer. I'll probably never see some of those things in person again. Jerseys, actual wool jerseys and stuff. Yes, do that, and they're all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was a great time. It was just nice meeting so many people there. A couple days in Chicago, and we all had a blast. And you're right. What we saw there was, Hall of Fame worthy. It's incredibly cool. I could be mistaken, but I think Winnipeg has something coming up in the next couple weeks.
In August, yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, I couldn't find it quickly, but I've heard great things about that show the past couple of years. And
Yep, it's a good show. I did it a couple of years ago. It was good. A huge, local contingent, and just amazing stuff from WHA all the way up to, Jets 1.0 and Jet 2.0. It's just amazing Jets history up there. It's great.
Yeah, and you may see stuff that was bought, somebody basically put in their closet, brings out to this event, and you won't find pictures online or some crazy thing out there. It's cool. And yeah, we're doing one late October in St. Louis. They go in all over. Find one that's close to you, and if not, help start one.
Exactly.
Because social media is great, and I think it's grown this hobby a lot from back in old just forum days to now being able to live chat with other collectors. But getting in person and putting your hands on these jerseys and talking and telling stories, it makes it so much more fun. That's the best part of the hobby for sure.
Yeah.
Chris, anything else on your mind before we get out of here?
No, just kind of echoing what y'all have already said. There's so many good people in the hobby, and I hope people, if you're new, join some of those Facebook groups, and we'll be more than happy to introduce you to things. We all want to help each other. There's very few bad eggs. There's way more good folks than bad in these groups, and we all like to have a good, healthy community. And maybe a future podcast should be the art of the photo match, Doc. That'd be a fun one.
That's on my list for sure, because it's every time, I think every single jersey I own, I've been able to photo match, even going back to 90s and that, and it's a fun side sport, just finding the weird matches and unexpected matches in some case. No, that's a fantastic. It is on my list of future episodes.
Most excellent.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time this evening. I hope it was an interesting discussion for you and for the rest of the hobby. We'll get this posted later tonight, and everybody can start watching it tomorrow. And we'll see. Thank you again for joining the Dirty Laundry Game Worn Hockey Podcast. The hobby is sometimes dirty in a way, so we'll see where this case goes, and I'll keep you guys up to date as long as along with everybody else. Gentlemen, have a fantastic evening. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, guys.
It was a pleasure. Take care.
thank you, everyone. Cheers.